The grand hall in Vienna smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the black grand piano that sat center stage like a sleeping giant. Around it, 20 young musicians sat in a semicircle, their eyes fixed on the man pacing before them. Victor Hoffman was exactly the kind of pianist you'd see on magazine covers. Tall, silver-haired, with hands that moved through the air as he spoke like he was conducting an invisible orchestra. He'd performed in every major concert hall from New York to Tokyo. Critics called him a genius. His students called him terrifying. Mediocrity, he was saying. His voice, sharp enough to cut glass, is the enemy of art. If you cannot play with perfection, you have no business touching these keys. The students nodded, scribbling notes in their leather-bound journals. Each of them had paid thousands to attend this 3-day masterclass. Each of them hoped that Victor's approval might open doors that had remained firmly shut. In the back row, a girl sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap. Her name was Elena Rodriguez, and she was 17 years old. Unlike the others, she wasn't writing anything down. She couldn't. Her eyes, though open, saw nothing but darkness. She'd been blind since she was 8 years old. Elena had saved every penny from her weekend job at her uncle's restaurant for 2 years to afford this workshop. Her mother had tried to talk her out of it. "Why torture yourself?" she'd asked. "You know how these people are." But Elena had insisted. This was her dream. This was her chance. Now. Victor clapped his hands together, the sound echoing through the hall. "Who wants to play first? Show me what you've learned from yesterday's session." Hands shot up immediately. A boy from Germany played Chopin with technical precision but no soul. A girl from France attempted Debussy and fumbled through the middle section. Victor critiqued them both with brutal honesty, his words making several students wince. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. She'd been practicing a piece for months, perfecting every note in the privacy of her bedroom. But now, sitting in this room full of strangers, doubt crept in like cold water. "Anyone else?" Victor asked, sounding bored already. Elena's hand rose slowly into the air. The room went quiet. She could feel eyes turning toward her, could sense the sudden shift in atmosphere. Victor's footsteps approached. "Yes?" His voice was directly in front of her now. "You in the back. Do you have something prepared?" "I do," Elena said softly. "I'd like to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the first movement." Someone snickered. Another person whispered something she couldn't quite catch. Her cheeks burned. "Rachmaninoff?" Victor's tone carried amusement. "That's quite ambitious. Are you sure you wouldn't prefer something simpler?" "I'm sure," Elena said, her voice steadier now. "Very well." Victor sighed like she was wasting his time. "Come up then." Elena stood, unfolding her white cane. The metal clicked against the floor as she navigated toward the piano. Each step felt like walking through mud. She could hear the whispers now clearer. Is she blind? Oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. Why would she even come here? Victor's voice cut through the murmurs. Well, this should be interesting. Perhaps we'll all learn something about the importance of realistic goals. Laughter rippled through the room. Not loud, but enough. Enough for Elena to know that she was the joke. Her hands found the piano bench. She sat down slowly, carefully, folding her cane and placing it beside her. The piano keys were cool beneath her fingertips as she positioned her hands. She'd played this piece 1,000 times. She knew every chord, every transition, every moment where the music swelled and fell. But right now, in this moment, her mind went blank. Behind her, Victor leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "We don't have all day." More snickers. Elena's hands trembled. She thought about her mother, who'd stayed up late helping her memorize pieces by playing them over and over. She thought about her little brother, who always sat outside her room doing homework while she practiced, claiming her music helped him concentrate. She thought about her piano teacher back home, an elderly woman who'd refused to charge Elena for lessons because she believed in her. "They don't see you," her teacher had said once. "They only see what they think your limits are, but you'll show them there are no limits." Elena took a deep breath. Her fingers found the opening notes, and then she began to play. The first chord filled the room like thunder, rich, deep, commanding. Her left hand moved with absolute certainty, while her right hand danced across the higher keys. The melody poured out of the piano, each note crystal clear, each phrase perfectly shaped. The whispering stopped. Victor straightened up from the wall, his eyebrows rising. Elena's body swayed slightly as she played, feeling the music rather than seeing it. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed during the technical runs, then softened to barely a whisper during the tender passages. She added her own improvisations, small flourishes that made the piece uniquely hers while respecting Rachmaninoff's genius. She wasn't just playing the notes, she was telling a story of longing, of triumph, of a soul reaching for something just beyond its grasp and finally touching it. The students sat frozen, mouths open. Some had tears in their eyes. The boy from Germany gripped his notebook so hard his knuckles turned white. The girl from France had stopped breathing. Victor moved closer to the piano, his expression transformed. The smirk was gone. The casual arrogance had vanished. He watched Elena's hands with the focus of a man witnessing a miracle. The music built to its climax. Elena's entire body engaged in the performance. Her face showed every emotion the piece contained: pain, joy, defiance, hope. And then with a final cascading run down the keys, she brought the movement to its conclusion. The last note hung in the air, vibrating through the silence. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the room exploded with applause. Elena sat still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, her chest rising and falling rapidly. She could hear the clapping, feel it vibrating through the floor, but she couldn't quite believe it was real. Victor stood beside the piano now, his face flushed. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his celebrated career, he had no words. Finally, Elena turned her head in his direction. Though she couldn't see his face, she could sense his presence, could feel the weight of his shame hanging in the air between them. "Did my blindness change what you heard?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the settling applause. "Or did it only change what you expected to hear?" The question hung there unanswered as the room fell silent once again. Nobody noticed the phone at first. It was just another student in the 3rd row, holding up their device like dozens of others had done throughout the workshop. But this time the record button was on. Every note Elena played, every second of Victor's dismissive comments, every moment of her breathtaking performance was captured in high definition. The student, a 19-year-old girl named Lucia from Barcelona, hadn't planned to post it anywhere. She just wanted to remember this moment, to have proof that she'd witnessed something extraordinary. But when she got back to her hotel room that evening and watched the video again, her hands were shaking. She texted her roommate, "You have to see this." Then she texted her brother, who was studying music in London. Then, almost without thinking, she opened her social media app and hit upload. The caption was simple: "Blind pianist silences arrogant maestro. Watch until the end." She put her phone down and went to take a shower. By the time she came back 20 minutes later, the video had 3,000 views. By midnight, it had 500,000. By morning, the number had climbed to 8 million. Elena knew nothing about any of this. She'd returned to her tiny hotel room after the workshop, emotionally exhausted. Her hands were still trembling from the adrenaline. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Victor had barely spoken to her afterward, just given her a stiff nod before dismissing the class early. The other students had crowded around her, asking questions, offering congratulations, but she'd been too overwhelmed to process much of it. Now she sat on her bed, running her fingers over the Braille book she'd brought from home. Her phone buzzed occasionally, but she ignored it. She didn't use social media much anyway. Her phone was just a tool for calls and voice messages. Meanwhile, across the internet, her performance was spreading like wildfire. Comments flooded in by the thousands. "I'm literally crying. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The way he laughed at her, and then his face when she started playing Karma. "This girl has more talent in her pinky finger than most people have in their entire body. Classical music needs more people like her, and fewer people like him." News websites picked up the story by dawn. Viral video shows blind teen stunning famous pianist. Classical music world rocked by discrimination controversy. Who is Elena Rodriguez, the blind pianist everyone's talking about? Victor woke up to 47 missed calls and over 200 emails. His assistant was at his door before he'd even had his coffee, her face pale. You need to see this, she said, thrusting her tablet at him. He watched the video in silence, his coffee growing cold in his hand. There he was, making that comment about charity cases. There was his smirk. There was his arrogant lean against the wall. And there was Elena, proving him wrong with every single note. The comments section was brutal. This man represents everything wrong with classical music. Imagine being this talented and still being treated like trash because of a disability. Victor Hoffman should be ashamed of himself. Cancel this guy. We don't need this kind of discrimination in the arts. His phone rang. It was the director of the Vienna Conservatory, where he held a prestigious teaching position. Victor, we need to talk, the voice said, tight with barely controlled anger. By noon, 3 concert halls had canceled his upcoming performances. By evening, a major music festival had announced they were removing him from their lineup. Victor sat in his apartment, watching his career crumble in real time. And for the first time in decades, he felt genuine fear. Back in her hotel, Elena's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Finally, her roommate from the workshop knocked on her door. Elena, you need to check your messages. Something's happening. Elena listened as her roommate read through the notifications, requests for interviews from major news channels, invitations to perform at concert halls in Paris, London, New York, Tokyo, messages from music producers, talent agents, documentary filmmakers. Her social media followers had jumped from 300 to over 2 million overnight. I don't understand, Elena said quietly. How do they even know who I am? Her roommate explained about the video, about the millions of views, about the global conversation it had sparked. Elena sat very still, processing this information. She'd wanted to prove herself, yes, but she hadn't wanted it to happen like this. She hadn't wanted to become a symbol, a viral moment, a trending topic. There's more, her roommate said hesitantly. People are going after Victor pretty hard. Some are calling for him to lose his job. There's a petition with over 50,000 signatures asking the Vienna Conservatory to fire him. Elena's stomach churned. Yes, Victor had been cruel. Yes, he'd humiliated her, but she'd never wanted to destroy his career. She just wanted him to listen. Her phone rang. It was her mother calling from their small apartment back home. Mija, what's happening? The neighbors are showing me videos on their phones. The news people are outside our building. Your father can't even get to work. Mama, I'm sorry, I didn't know this would... Sorry? Baby, don't be sorry. I'm so proud of you I could burst. But are you okay? Do you need us to come get you? Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm okay, Mama, I'm confused. This isn't how I thought it would happen. Life never happens how we think it will, her mother said gently. But you played beautifully. You showed the world what we've always known, that you're extraordinary. Over the next few days, the story continued to grow. Think pieces were written about disability discrimination in classical music. Discussions erupted about accessibility in the arts. Other musicians with disabilities began sharing their own stories of being dismissed, overlooked, or outright rejected because of who they were. Elena gave one interview to a major news network, speaking carefully and thoughtfully. I don't want this to be just about me and Victor, she said. I want people to understand that there are thousands of talented artists with disabilities who never get a chance because someone decides to judge them before they even perform. The piano doesn't care if I can see it. The music doesn't care about my eyes. So why should anyone else? The interview was viewed 20 million times. Concert halls around the world started reaching out with serious offers. Carnegie Hall, the Sydney Opera House, Royal Albert Hall in London. Each invitation felt surreal, impossible. Just a week ago, she'd been saving coins from tips at her uncle's restaurant. Now the world wanted to hear her play, but there was one call that surprised her most. It came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, 5 days after the video went viral. Her phone rang with an unknown Vienna number. She answered hesitantly. Hello? Elena Rodriguez? The voice was familiar, though strained. This is Victor Hoffman. I was wondering, would you be willing to meet with me? I owe you a conversation, a real one. Elena sat very still, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to refuse, to let him sit with the consequences of his actions. But another part, the part that had spent years proving that people were more than their worst moments, that part spoke first. Okay, she said quietly. I'll meet with you. They met at a small cafe far from the tourist areas of Vienna. Elena arrived with her roommate, who insisted on coming along for safety. Victor was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking nothing like the polished maestro from the workshop. His shirt was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. There were dark circles under his eyes. He stood when Elena approached, nearly knocking over his coffee cup. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." Elena sat down across from him, her cane folded beside her chair. "I almost didn't." Her roommate took a table nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them privacy. The cafe was quiet, just the hiss of the espresso machine and soft classical music playing from hidden speakers. Victor didn't speak for a long moment. Elena could hear him breathing, could sense his nervousness in the way he shifted in his seat. "I've been playing piano since I was 4 years old," he finally said. 53 years. I've performed for presidents and queens. I've taught at the most prestigious conservatories in Europe. And in all that time, I thought I understood what music was about." He paused. "I was wrong." Elena said nothing, waiting. "When you walked up to that piano, I saw your cane and I made a decision about you in 2 seconds. I decided you couldn't possibly be as good as the others. That you were there out of pity, or quota filling, or some misguided sense of inclusion." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't even give you a chance in my mind. You were already less than before you played a single note." "I know," Elena said quietly. "I could hear it in your voice." "I'm not telling you this to make excuses," Victor continued. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand that this wasn't just a bad day or a careless comment. This is who I've been for years, maybe decades, and I never saw it." Elena tilted her head slightly. "What changed?" "I watched that video. Not the public one. I found the full recording, the entire workshop, and I saw myself." He let out a bitter laugh. "Really saw myself for the first time. The way I spoke to that boy from Munich, telling him he had sausage fingers. The way I rolled my eyes when the girl from Lyon made a mistake. The way I made all of you feel small so I could feel big." He was quiet for a moment. "But with you it was worse. Because I didn't just criticize your playing. I dismissed your existence. A server came by with menus. They both waved her away. My daughter called me," Victor said suddenly. "We haven't spoken in 4 years. She's a painter, you see. Very talented. But I told her art wasn't a real career, that she was wasting her life. She stopped taking my calls after that." He rubbed his face with both hands. "She called to tell me she'd seen the video. She said, 'Now you know how you made me feel every day of my childhood.'" Elena felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd expected defensiveness, maybe a rehearsed apology written by a publicist. Not this raw, broken honesty. "I'm losing everything," Victor said.
"My teaching positions.
My concert bookings. My reputation. And the terrible thing is, I deserve it. The truly terrible thing is that part of me wants to be angry at you for recording that video, for posting it, for ruining my career." He looked at her directly now. "But you didn't ruin anything. You just held up a mirror, and I hate what I see." "I didn't post the video," Elena said. "I didn't even know about it until the next day." Victor blinked. "You didn't?" "No. One of the other students recorded it. She posted it. I would never," Elena trailed off. "I just wanted to play. I wanted you to hear me. Really hear me. Not my disability. Not your assumptions. Just the music." They sat in silence for a while. The cafe owner brought them water without being asked. "Tell me your story," Victor said finally. "If you're willing." "I want to understand," so Elena told him, about losing her sight at 8 years old to a degenerative condition, about the doctors who said she'd never be able to pursue music seriously, about the music schools that rejected her applications without even hearing her play, about her first piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, who was elderly and half-deaf herself but who believed in Elena when no one else did. "She taught me to trust my ears completely," Elena explained, "to feel the music in my bones. She'd play pieces for me over and over until I could memorize them. Then she'd sit with me for hours while I practiced, correcting by touch instead of by sight." Elena smiled at the memory. She used to say that losing my sight gave me a gift, that I could hear things other people missed because they were too busy reading the notes on the page. "She sounds like a remarkable teacher," Victor said softly. "She died last year," Elena said. "She never got to see me play in a real concert hall. She spent her whole life teaching kids in her living room, charging almost nothing because she loved music more than money. Elena's voice grew stronger. She was a better musician than you'll ever be. Not because of her technique, but because she understood that music is about connection, not perfection. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Victor absorbed them without flinching. "You're right," he said simply, and Elena wasn't finished. "Do you know how many hours I practice? Twice as long as everyone else because I have to memorize everything. Do you know how many concerts I've been rejected from because organizers assumed a blind pianist would be a liability? Do you know how many people have told me to just teach instead of perform, because performing is for normal musicians?" Her voice was rising now, months of frustration pouring out. "I came to your workshop because I wanted to learn from the best. I wanted to improve. I wanted someone with your experience to tell me honestly what I needed to work on. Instead, you laughed at me. You made me into a joke before I even touched the keys." "I know," Victor said, and there were tears in his eyes now. "I know, and I will regret that moment for the rest of my life." Elena took a shaky breath, feeling the anger drain out of her. "So what now? You apologize, I forgive you, everyone moves on?" "No," Victor said firmly. "An apology means nothing without action. I want to change. Really change. Not just say sorry and hope people forget." He leaned forward. "I've been thinking about this for days. I want to start a foundation for musicians with disabilities, to fund training, equipment, performances, to help people like you get the chances you deserve without having to fight for every single opportunity." Elena was quiet, considering. "That sounds good on paper, but how do I know this isn't just damage control? How do I know you'll actually follow through once the news cameras go away?" "You don't," Victor admitted. "You have no reason to trust me, but I'm going to do it anyway. Whether you believe me or not, whether the public forgives me or not, because for the first time in my life I'm not doing something to build my career or my legacy. I'm doing it because it's right." He pulled out a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. "This is the initial proposal. I've already spoken with my financial advisor. I'm committing €2 million to start. I want to name it after your teacher, the Chen Foundation for Musical Excellence." Elena's hands found the folder. She couldn't read it, of course, but she could feel the thickness of the documents inside, the weight of them. "Why Mrs. Chen?" she asked. "Because she represents what I should have been, what I still hope to become." Elena sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. This conversation had gone in directions she never anticipated. Victor was a broken man, but maybe, just maybe, he was also a man trying to rebuild himself into something better. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. "Of course," Victor said immediately. "Take all the time you need. And Elena, thank you for giving me the chance to apologize face to face. You didn't have to do that." As Elena stood to leave, Victor spoke one more time. "When you perform at Carnegie Hall, or wherever you choose to play next, I'd like to be in the audience, not as a critic or a judge, just as someone who finally learned how to listen." Elena paused at the door of the cafe, her hand on her roommate's arm. "We'll see," she said, but there was something in her voice that wasn't quite refusal, something that sounded almost like hope. 3 months later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, and she was absolutely terrified. Her hands were ice cold despite the warmth of the building. She could hear the murmur of the crowd filtering through the heavy curtains, thousands of voices blending into a sound like distant ocean waves. Sold out, every single seat. People had been camping outside for tickets. Some had flown in from other countries just to be here. "You okay?" her brother asked, squeezing her shoulder. He'd taken time off from college to be here to help her navigate this impossible moment. "I think I'm going to throw up," Elena admitted. "That's normal," said her mother from her other side. "Your father threw up before our wedding. Look how that turned out." "Mama, that's not helpful," Elena said, but she smiled despite herself. Her father was out in the audience somewhere, probably crying already. He'd been crying on and off for weeks, ever since they'd gotten the invitation. His little girl performing at Carnegie Hall. It was the kind of thing that didn't happen to families like theirs. The stage manager approached, her heels clicking on the polished floor. 5 minutes, Miss Rodriguez." Elena nodded, her throat too tight to speak. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind. After that meeting with Victor in Vienna, she'd returned home to find her entire life transformed. Interview requests, performance offers, a recording contract with a major classical label, a documentary crew that wanted to follow her journey. It was overwhelming and exciting and exhausting all at once, but she'd been careful. She'd turned down most of the offers, accepting only the ones that felt right. She'd hired a manager, a sharp woman named Patricia who actually understood classical music and didn't just see dollar signs. And she'd practiced hours and hours every day until her fingers ached and her back hurt from sitting at the piano bench. Tonight's performance was special for another reason. She wasn't just playing classical pieces. She was premiering her own composition, something she'd been working on for 2 years. A piece she'd written about what it felt like to lose her sight and find music in the darkness. She'd never shared it with anyone before. The thought of playing it for thousands of people made her stomach twist. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Elena's brother walked her to the wings. She could feel the energy of the crowd now, vibrating through the floorboards. Somewhere out there were her old teachers, her childhood friends, kids from her neighborhood who'd pooled money to buy tickets together. And somewhere out there, though she'd told no one but her family, was Victor Hoffman. True to his word, he'd established the foundation. The Chen Foundation had launched 6 weeks ago with a ceremony that made national news. Victor had spoken about his mistakes, about his prejudices, about the need to change the classical music world from the inside out. He'd announced scholarships, grants for adaptive equipment, partnerships with music schools to ensure accessibility. Elena had watched his speech online. She'd heard the sincerity in his voice, but she'd also heard something else: exhaustion. Victor was fighting an uphill battle. Many in the classical music establishment had turned against him. Some said he was only doing this to save his reputation. Others said no apology could undo the damage he'd caused over the years. But the foundation was real. The money was real. And last week, a 15-year-old deaf percussionist had received the first Chen Foundation scholarship. Elena had spoken to her on the phone, heard the joy in her voice, and thought maybe, just maybe, something good was coming from all of this. 1 minute. Elena took a deep breath, then another. Her hands were shaking. "Hey," her brother said softly, "remember what Mrs. Chen used to say?" Elena smiled. "The piano is your friend. It doesn't judge you. It just waits for you to speak." "Exactly. So go out there and have a conversation with your friend." The stage manager touched her elbow gently. "It's time." Elena walked out onto the stage, her brother guiding her to the piano bench. The crowd's roar was deafening, a wall of sound that hit her like a physical force. She sat down, adjusted her position, and waited for the applause to fade. Silence settled over the hall. 3,000 people holding their breath. Elena placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She started with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a piece everyone knew, a safe choice. But there was nothing safe about the way she played it. She poured everything into those opening notes, all the longing and beauty and sadness that Beethoven had composed 200 years ago. The audience disappeared. The stage disappeared. There was only Elena and the piano and the music flowing between them. When she finished the first piece, the applause was thunderous. But Elena barely heard it. She was already moving into the next piece, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Then Debussy's Clair de Lune. Each piece different, each one showcasing a different aspect of her skill and sensitivity. An hour passed like minutes. Finally, Elena paused. This was the moment. Her original composition. She'd never played it for an audience before. Never even told anyone what it was about. Her heart hammered so hard she thought people in the front row might hear it. She leaned toward the microphone that had been set up beside the piano. "This last piece is something I wrote. It's called Finding Light. It's about losing something precious and discovering that what you find in its place might be even more precious. Thank you for listening." Her hands found the opening chord and she began to play. The piece started soft, almost fragile, like a child's first steps. Then it grew complex, dissonant, representing the confusion and fear of losing her sight. The middle section was chaotic, angry, full of crashing chords and racing runs that expressed all the frustration she'd felt as an 8-year-old girl, watching the world fade to black. But then, gradually, the music shifted. The chaos resolved into something beautiful. A melody emerged, tentative at first, then stronger. It represented her discovery of music as her new way of seeing, of understanding, of connecting with the world. The piece built to a triumphant finale, not happy exactly, but peaceful, accepting, transformed. When the final note faded, there was silence. Elena sat frozen, terrified that she'd miscalculated, that her personal story translated into music wasn't as powerful as she'd hoped. Then the audience erupted. People were on their feet, screaming, crying, applauding so hard the sound was like thunder. Elena could feel the vibrations through the stage, could sense the emotional energy radiating from 3,000 people who'd just experienced something they'd never forget. The applause went on and on. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. People didn't want to stop. They didn't want this moment to end. Elena stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. She bowed again and again, overwhelmed by the response. This was everything she'd dreamed of and more. This was vindication for every rejection, every dismissive comment, every person who'd told her to aim lower. Finally, the applause began to fade. Elena made her way off stage where her brother caught her in a huge hug. Her mother was sobbing. Even Patricia, her normally composed manager, was wiping her eyes. "You did it," her brother whispered. "You actually did it," but Elena barely heard him, because through the backstage door, she could hear something unexpected. The audience was chanting, rhythmic and insistent. Encore. Encore, encore! She hadn't prepared an encore. She'd thought the program was complete, but the crowd wanted more. They weren't ready to let her go. Elena wiped her tears and smiled. "I guess I'd better give them one more." Her brother led her back on stage and the crowd went wild again. Elena sat at the piano thinking quickly. What piece could possibly follow what she'd just played? What could be the right ending to this incredible night? And then she knew. "This one," she said into the microphone, "is for my teacher, Mrs. Chen. She taught me that music isn't about perfection, it's about truth." She began to play a simple piece, one of the first songs Mrs. Chen had ever taught her. Nothing flashy or technically impressive. Just a gentle, beautiful melody that spoke of gratitude and love and the bond between teacher and student. When she finished, the audience was silent again. But this time it wasn't shock. It was reverence. Elena had taken them on a complete journey, from virtuosic displays to raw emotion to simple, profound beauty. As she stood to take her final bow, Elena thought about Victor sitting somewhere in the audience. She wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling. She wondered if he understood now what Mrs. Chen had known all along. That music, real music, required humility. It required the ability to listen, to truly see people for who they were, not who you assumed them to be. The stage lights were warm on her face as she bowed one last time, and Elena realized something. She'd spent her whole life trying to prove she belonged in this world of classical music. But tonight she hadn't proven anything. She'd simply shown everyone who she already was. 6 months after Carnegie Hall, Elena sat in a classroom that smelled of fresh paint and new wood. Sunlight streamed through wide windows designed to let in as much natural light as possible. The room held 10 pianos, each one carefully positioned with extra space between them for easy navigation. On the walls were sheets of Braille music, printed large format scores, and colorful visual aids at different heights. This was her school, the Elena Rodriguez Academy for Musical Arts, and it was opening day. "Miss Rodriguez, there's someone here to see you," said her assistant, a young woman named Sophie who helped manage the day-to-day operations. Elena looked up from the Braille roster she'd been reviewing. 12 students were starting today. 12 kids who'd been rejected from other programs or told their dreams were impossible. A blind violinist from Morocco, a deaf drummer from Thailand, a pianist with cerebral palsy from Ireland, a girl with autism from Brazil who composed symphonies in her head but struggled to communicate verbally. "Who is it?" Elena asked. "Victor Hoffman." Elena's hands stilled on the paper. She hadn't seen Victor since Carnegie Hall, though they'd exchanged a few emails about the Chen Foundation. The foundation was thriving now, having funded 47 students in its first 6 months. Victor had stepped back from most of his performing to focus on the foundation full-time. His reputation was still recovering, but slowly, people were beginning to see his efforts as genuine. "Send him in," Elena said. Victor entered quietly, and Elena could hear the hesitation in his footsteps. He was nervous. "Good, she was nervous too." "Elena," he said, "thank you for seeing me. I know you're busy with the opening." "Sit down," Elena said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "What brings you here?" Victor sat and Elena heard him take a deep breath. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider partnering with the Chen Foundation. Officially." Your school could become one of our flagship programs. We could provide funding, resources, help you expand. Elena leaned back in her chair. I'm doing fine on my own. The Carnegie Hall performance raised enough money to get started, and I have donors lined up. I know, Victor said quickly. I'm not suggesting you need saving. I'm suggesting we could do more together than apart. There are hundreds of kids out there who need what you're building here. With the Foundation's network, we could help you reach them. Elena considered this. She'd built this school without Victor's help deliberately. She'd wanted to prove she could do it on her own terms without owing anyone anything. But was that pride talking? Or practicality? Why do you really want a partner? Elena asked. Be honest. Victor was quiet for a moment. Because I want to be part of something that matters. For years I built my career on tearing people down to lift myself up. Now I'm trying to build people up instead. But I can't do it alone. I need people like you. People who actually understand what these kids are going through. People like me, Elena repeated. You mean people with disabilities? I mean people with wisdom I don't have, Victor said firmly. People who fought for their place in this world and won. People who know what it's like to be underestimated and can teach others how to rise above it. Elena drummed her fingers on the desk, thinking. Outside she could hear students arriving. Nervous chatter in multiple languages. Parents asking questions. Sophie welcoming everyone warmly. If we partner, Elena said slowly, I have conditions. Anything. First, I maintain full control of the curriculum and teaching methods. The Foundation provides support, not direction. Agreed. Second, any student the Foundation funds through this program gets accepted based on passion and potential, not on how they'll look in a press release. Of course. Third, you don't just write checks and show up for photo opportunities. You teach here. At least one class a month. You work with these kids directly. You learn from them. Victor was silent for a longer moment this time. I'm not sure I'm qualified to teach students with disabilities. I don't have the training or experience. Then you'll learn, Elena said simply, just like they're learning. That's the whole point. We're all students here. Some of us just happen to be further along in certain areas. You're asking me to be vulnerable, Victor said quietly. To admit what I don't know. Yes, Elena said. I am, because that's what real teaching is. It's not standing on a stage pretending you have all the answers. It's sitting beside someone and figuring things out together. Victor stood up and walked to the window. Elena could hear him there, looking out at the students gathering in the courtyard below. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. There's a boy down there, maybe 13, 14 years old. He's in a wheelchair, and he's looking at this building like it's made of gold. That's Daniel, Elena said, from Chile. His spine was injured in an accident 2 years ago. He plays guitar, beautifully, but his old music school told him he couldn't continue because he couldn't stand for performances. That's insane, Victor said. That's normal, Elena corrected. That's the world we're trying to change. Victor turned back to face her. I'll do it. Your conditions, all of them. I'll teach here, I'll learn here. I'll make mistakes and look foolish and probably say the wrong thing 100 times. Probably, Elena agreed with a small smile. But I'll keep showing up, Victor continued, because that boy down there deserves better than what I represented. They all do. Elena stood and extended her hand. Victor shook it, his grip firm. Welcome to the Academy, Professor Hoffman, Elena said. Your first class starts in an hour. You're teaching basic music theory to the beginners. Victor's hand tightened slightly. An hour? Elena, I haven't prepared anything. Good, Elena said. Neither have they. You'll figure it out together. That's how this works. The opening ceremony was chaos in the best possible way. Parents crying. Students nervous and excited. Sophie running around with clipboards and schedules. Elena's brother helping translate for families who didn't speak English. Her mother in the kitchen preparing food for everyone because that's what her mother did when she was emotional. Elena stood at the front of the assembled group and gave a short speech. She talked about Mrs. Chen, about believing in potential instead of limitations, about how music belonged to everyone who loved it enough to pursue it. This school isn't about being the best, she said. It's about being yourself, your whole self, not despite your challenges, not because of them, but as a complete person who happens to have music in their soul. The students clapped, some uncertainly, some with wild enthusiasm. Elena could hear the differences in their applause. could sense their individual personalities and how they responded. After the ceremony, students filtered into their first classes. Elena walked through the halls, listening. In one room, Victor was stumbling through an introduction, his usual confidence gone, replaced by genuine humility as he asked students to help him understand their different learning needs. In another room, a violin teacher was working with the blind student from Morocco, both of them laughing as they found new ways to communicate tempo and dynamics. Elena found herself in the practice room, where Daniel, the boy from Chile, was setting up his guitar. She knocked on the doorframe. "Mind if I listen?" she asked. "Please," Daniel said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. She sat in the corner while he tuned his guitar, taking his time, getting everything perfect. Then he began to play. It was a piece he'd written himself, he explained. About wheels and wings, about being held down and learning to fly anyway. The music was raw and honest and absolutely beautiful. Elena closed her eyes, though it made no difference, and just listened. This was why she'd built this school. For moments like this. For kids like Daniel who had music bursting out of them and nowhere to let it free. When he finished, Elena applauded softly. "That was extraordinary. Have you thought about performing it?" "Who would want to hear a kid in a wheelchair play guitar?" Daniel asked, and there was no self-pity in his voice, just honest curiosity. Elena smiled. "Everyone, trust me. The whole world wants to hear what you have to say. They just don't know it yet." That evening, after all the students had gone home, after the staff had cleaned up and left, Elena sat alone at the piano in the main hall. Her fingers found the keys and she played softly, not for any audience, just for herself. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. About Victor's cruelty and his redemption. About the viral video that changed everything. About Carnegie Hall and the standing ovation that seemed to last forever. About Mrs. Chen, who'd believed in her when belief was all she had. But mostly she thought about the 12 students who'd walked through her doors today. 12 kids who'd been told no so many times that yes felt like a foreign language. 12 futures that were suddenly wide open. The door opened quietly. Victor stood there, backlit by the hallway lights. "May I?" he asked. Elena nodded, moving over on the bench. Victor sat beside her, his hands hovering over the keys. "I made so many mistakes today," he said.
In that class.
"I didn't know how to explain things in ways they could understand. I talked too fast, used too much jargon. I was terrible." "Yes," Elena agreed. "You were," Victor laughed, surprised. "You're supposed to say I did fine, that it'll get better." "It will get better," Elena said. "But only if you acknowledge where you are now. You were terrible today. Tomorrow you'll be slightly less terrible. In a month you might even be decent. That's how learning works." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two pianists on one bench, their hands resting on the same keys. "Thank you," Victor said quietly, "for giving me a chance to be part of this, to be part of something real." "Thank you for being willing to change," Elena replied. "That's harder than playing any piece of music. Changing who you are." Victor placed his hands on the keys and began to play. Something simple, something humble. And Elena joined him, their hands dancing around each other, creating harmony where there had once been discord. Outside, the sun set over the city. Tomorrow, 12 students would return, ready to learn, ready to grow, ready to prove that music had no barriers except the ones we build ourselves. And in that small school with the wide windows and the 10 pianos, a new kind of music was being born. One that sounded like hope.